Rabbi Eliezer, how are you today?
Baruch Hashem.
Excellent. So it's a pleasure to be back with the Rabbi Doctor, recording live from the Holy Land, the Ramat Beit Shemesh. Last Masechta we did was Masechtas Tainus, and Baruch Hashem, we got some nice feedback. You got feedback directly. I got a lot of feedback, and people really seem to enjoy having some background to the Seforim, to the Masechta itself, the history of the Masechta, and the Rishonim and Acharonim that are written on the Masechta. So let's start. Let's jump right in. Maseches Megillah. Anything unique about the Gemara itself?
Okay, so just to mention very briefly, as far as, let's say, Kisvei Yad, manuscripts of the Gemara, so like many other Masechtas, you have the Dikdukei Seforim, and more currently, a fellow in Eretz Yisrael, a very prolific fellow named Rabbi Aaron Gabbai, he put out small little works on Masechtas Megillah. They're available if you search online, and he has a small write-up about updating you, which is if you're interested in various manuscripts of Masechtas Megillah. But moving right along, after Masechtas Megillah, the manuscripts, just to mention, today we have Yerushalmi. Thanks to ArtScroll, we have Hebrew, English, and there was a Machon that was also that still is, I think, working on Yerushalmi, which on Megillah they have a beautiful edition. It's called Machon Darkei Simcha. I believe it's a bunch of Ger Hasidim, a massive work on Megillah. Very useful. Okay, one last thing is Tosefta. Normally we don't really, Tosefta is its own discussion, not for now, but Masechtas Megillah, just to mention, as Mechon Ofek a few years back printed a work that was completed somewhere around 1801, 1802, by a Rabbi Isaac, who we don't really know much about, who was in Amsterdam. The book has an extensive Hagdama, without getting into it, but this was a person who spent his life dedicated to the Tosefta. Interesting is he probably was not aware. At the exact same time, there were three other people very involved with Tosefta. Beforehand, there was almost no one involved with Tosefta. These three people at the same time was the Chazei David, which we do have on Tosefta. The Vilna Gaon was very involved with Tosefta, and Rishaya Berlin, Rabbi Shaya Pick. This work remained a manuscript. It's on 30 Masechtas, 3 massive volumes over 1,400 pages. Mechon Ofek did print Masechtas Megillah. Anyway, that's just some interesting things before we get to the actual Mefarshim, Rishonim, and Acharonim on the Masechta.
Very good. If I could just stick in, the Chasdei David, we have a colleague who works with us at the OU, David Pardo. I believe he's Ben Achaben from Chasdei David. Okay, thank you for that. Last time we were learning Masechtas Tainus, we spent a lot of time discussing Rashi and Masechtas Tainus. Is it Rashi? Is it not Rashi? Is it Talmidim of Rashi? There was some discussion about that. In Megillah, we back to the regular standard Rashi that we have on most of Shas?
Yeah, basically we are back to regular Rashi. Just one interesting tool is that we have the same fellow I mentioned by Rosh Hashanah, Aaron Erend, Dr. Aaron Erend of Bar Ilan. He put out a critical edition also on this Masechta Megillah. Very useful based on the manuscripts, and also a running commentary explaining many of what Rashi, various interesting things relating to Rashi throughout this work.
Okay, so you want to jump right into the regular Rishonim, the standard Rishonim, Rashba, Ramban. What are they? Are they different than this Masechta?
Very briefly, it's interesting is the Chidah and Shem Agdolim has a listing. He says that it's important to know the Mefarshim on Shas. He says, in our day, which is in the Chidah's time when he's writing the Shem Agdolim, which is at the end of the 1700s, it says we're zeicha to have many new Rishonim that wasn't available up till then. So he lists out on each Masechta what they are. So for Masechtas Megillah, he lists out, we have the Rashba, the Taisis Rosh, the Meiri, and the Ritva. Now, interesting is that whatever the Chidah had, all gets updated. First of all, the Ramban, there was also pieces of the Ramban that was around that time. I'm not sure why he did not mention it. The Ritva, which he does mention, it seems there was some more pieces that he was aware of later on. And the Rashba, in past recent years, it was a major discovery of much more material of the Rashba. But what's significant is in the 1790s is when all this is happening. Pretty much beforehand, someone wants to learn Megillah, there's not all that many Rishonim around. And that changes in the 1790s, and that's what the Chidah is referring to around the time when he did it. Okay, now just to mention, like every Masechta, there's other Rishonim. We're not going to list out all of them. You'll have to forgive me, but we are on a time clock. Otherwise, people will complain. Just to mention two. One is three things. One, we have Mechon Ofek again. Masechtas Megillah put out a Shittel on Masechtas Megillah, which is a very useful Pirush. And this Pirush significantly is, if you look in the Ritva, Raj Ramban, they do not deal so much with Agaddah Gemaras, which we'll deal with shortly on this Masechta, whereas the Shita Masechtas Megillah has a few pieces on the Agaddah section of the Gemara. And also, more recently, as I'm just going to mention, the most recent version of it is a Pirush Ari al-Madari that was printed from someone in Bnei Brodt based on manuscripts. It was printed earlier, but this is the most current edition of it. And like everything else, there's always new discoveries being made every few months. Recent discovery of more pieces of the Ritz Gaius, and that was printed in one of the most recent editions of the Yeshurun journal that comes out a few times a year. But that's pretty much about the Rishonim on the Masechta that are some unique Rishonim.
Okay, so those are the Rishonim. Like every Masechta, I'm assuming there are the classic Acharonim, the Rabbi Kivegers, the Chasam Sofers, Pnei Yehoshua. You want to talk about any specific unique Acharonim that may be familiar to people and give some history on one or two of them?
Yeah. As like this. First is we spoke about him a lot, so we're not going to speak about him now. But there is the Turi Evan from the Shargasari printed in 1781. That really sort of takes off. That's starting with the Acharonim on the Masechta. I'm not saying there's not anything beforehand, but okay. Now, just to mention, as I get feedback and flack sometimes, is that I do not mention enough of Svardi Acharonim, although I do. But okay. So one on this Masechta. He also wrote on Tainas, but on Masechtas Megillah we have the Matas Elikim. This sefer was the author dies in about 1840. He's from Italy. The sefer on Megillah is printed in 1821. It deals with most of the Masechta, including the Agaddah parts of the Masechta. And it was here. This is how it looks now. It was reprinted in the 1980s. People like to see how it looks. That's how it looks. But one interesting tidbit about him. This is a mamash, very very recent discovery, only a few months old. He's very famous because he wrote a sefer on Shabbos called Shabbos Shalmi. Many people use it it's a very pshat oriented sefer. Megillah, I'm pretty sure that it's listed in the various. Art Scroll uses it a lot, and I'm pretty sure, and I think also Masifta. But Ahavat Shalom has a journal that comes out sometimes once or twice a year called Minhag Nazim, a beautiful, beautiful journal. And the back, they started a new section, this came out a few months ago, of interesting tidbits, things that they find in manuscripts or old Seforim that look like they're about to be thrown out. Anyway, they found, it seems, a sefer that was owned by this. His name was Rabbi Yaakov Shimshon Shapsi, and they found in a sefer that must have been in his library a whole, like I would say, 4 or 5 pages. And in here, he lists out what he would do, stuff that he learned every year, and how many times he was Messiah Sefer Tehillim. Now you have to understand. What would you think? What would you predict? How many times he said Tehillim? So according to the listing over here, he said Tehillim over 3,000 times. He linked this with success and how he was learning, and with this, he was prolific, and he would be Messiah Shas Keseder, Kabbalah Svarim Keseder, and in this list that they printed, whatever they were able to put together from it, how many times he finished it, how many times he finished Shas, and he gives dates and linking it all the time. Oh, I finished Tehillim another bunch of times, and he felt, it seems, that saying Tehillim, now interesting, he used a Lashon Keseder of Limud Sefer Tehillim, which sounds like maybe he just wasn't like Stam saying it, he was even learning it as he was doing it. Anyway, Stam, interesting idea about him, and this is a Sefer on the Masechta. Another Sefer on the Masechta. Now this is an Acharon that we are, with most people in the world of Halacha, are very familiar with. This is from the Prima Gadim, Rabbi Yosef Tumen. Sometimes you want to know if you're supposed to be doing something. So I had a Rebbe Shemaifis this past week. One of my editions of my Rosh Yosef is here. I found it, but a friend of mine printed 20 years ago a Rosh Yosef on Masechtas Megillah with a lot of footnotes. So I said, let me go to one of my machsans where I have svarim. There are no order whatsoever. And if I find it within less than a minute, then I know that I have to. Not I have to, but I should probably continue doing this, even though even though it takes a lot of time. But okay, less than a minute, I walk in, and I promise you, if you saw pictures of this, you would not believe that this room even looks like this. I found the Sefer, so I said, that's it, I have to continue. Anyway, this Rosh Yosef, the Rosh Yosef of Maseches Megillah from the Pri Megadim. So now, because the Pri Megadim is very famous, but nothing more than we know, there's a Yid who's the Pri Megadim, and he's very chashuv, but we don't know much more than that. I'd just like to talk about him for very, very briefly, but some interesting tidbits about him. Number one, the Sefer Rosh Yosef, he was a very prolific author. Some of the stuff he printed in his lifetime. Most of it was not printed. I think most of his svarim were not printed in his lifetime. There's even manuscripts that have been printed even a few years ago. Some chuvas of his came out. Chuvas came out of his years before, on all areas of Torah. Now, first of all, the Rosh Yosef, the significance of Masechet Megillah is it's an excellent sefer. Mamish, excellent. If you could get this friend of mine, Binyamin Shapiro, who put out this edition, he's done other Masechtas of the Rosh Yosef. It's worthwhile, has a lot of good footnotes. Now, it's very pshat and also halachic, very thorough. It deals with all different types of things. But, as most people familiar with in the world of halacha, the Pri Megadim writes very cryptic, which is interesting because he was a tremendous Baal Medaktik. He was an expert in the Hebrew language, which I'm going to mention in a minute more about that. And sometimes you find that such a person, his skills in writing doesn't transfer over. Now, it might have been on purpose. He does say that he's writing very bekitzer, but so first of all, number one, on the Masechta, the Rosh Yosef is excellent, and no one needs to say how amazing and important and significant the Pri Megadim is, both for Archaim and Yeridea. It's a running commentary on the Noise Kalim. It is simply my little experience with it. It's unbelievable. I spent a lot of time with it with the Magen Avram, and it's mamish incredible. He's medaktik, and he's oimid on every tag shabbatag of these svarim. And in the world of halacha, when you look in the Mishnah Brura and others, you see how much incredible weight it has. So much so that even this was actually printed in his lifetime. A lot of these materials that someone had a taina, a chashuv, a person wrote an interesting sefer called Mishpat Tzedek, and in the sefer he writes about the significance of learning different svarim of halacha. And he writes that you should learn the Chayei Adam, but he has a shtickle tight on the Chayei Adam for not using the Pri Megadim. Now, mind you, the Pri Megadim only had just come out at the time, so it's not like the Chayei Adam could have ran to get it. But it happens to be the Chayei Adam did use the Pri Megadim a little. He did incorporate a little bit what he could, but he's a contemporary of the Pri Megadim, so it's not necessarily so much that he should have been quoting the Pri Megadim. He's definitely entitled to argue. However, the interesting is, I'd just like to say two things from the Chabiner Rav about the Galus of the Pri Megadim. One thing is he said about him is that someone said about him that he didn't even make any mistakes, but he said, Ad Kedei Kach, it's usher to say, there's no such thing. But the issue is when you have a machlokes, let's say, between the Nesivis, a contemporary of the Pri Megadim, and the Pri Megadim, who do you go like? So he says, he says that we go like the Chavadas, because he writes more clearly. Others say that, and if you're familiar with the Pri Megadim, he writes very like ulai, like a lot of anava in his writings. Whereas others say you could go like the Pri Megadim against the Chavadas. Anyway, bottom line is it's an extremely important sefer, and I'd just like to mention one last interesting tidbit about him, called tidbit, is that one of the things he wrote was a series of letters. These letters were printed originally in the Pri Megadim and Archaim, and then a lot of them were not printed, and more recent times they've been collected again. These letters are incredible, showing extensive knowledge in many areas besides halacha, not standard things like diktuk and interestingly enough, in these letters, he Kaseder encourages and says how one has to learn Chumash and Tanakh. Again and again, he says this, and he even says in some places in his writings that he himself wasn't zeicha to learn Tanakh. I don't know what that means. If you look in his writings, you see an unbelievable unbelievable yeda in the field of Torah, Nevi'im, and Suvim. Incredible. As I said, he's a tremendous Baal Medaktik. And he also recommends books and Seforim that one should learn and use. And he says you should make sure kids should be learning Diktuk and Chumash. And he in some places even says, people are embarrassed, they don't want to learn it. He says no, he's telling you this one of the keys to success is starting it from scratch. Also, you should learn it with Targum. And then he says that which Seforim should you use. So he says this a few places, is the Sefer Tishbi from Rabbi Bacher and the Meturgaman from Rabbi Bacher. And extensively he wrote a aris on them throughout these letters. And one other last thing, which is that he says you should use the aruch a lot. Now, this is an interesting piece of information. Why? Because without getting into barichas about the aruch, but the aruch is not only that it just says a pirish, a taich word, so to speak. It a lot of times helps understand the sugya when you look up a piece in the aruch. So for Masechtes Megilah, where Zeicha, we have a work called Limud Aruch from Rav Shlomo Bamberger, was printed in 1897, available on Hebrew Books, where he brings down all the pieces. He was malakeh from the aruch, all the pieces related to Masechtes Megillah. A lot of times you can find a piece of a rishon, not only a taich word, you're not sure what the word means, but even a piece of a lost rishon that the aruch had that we don't have today. Okay, now one last Acharon on the to mention is Rabbi Yedidia Tiu Weil. I love to say that name, obviously, and this person was the son of the Karbonisano Talmud, a very big Talmud of Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz. He's also Talmud of his father, the Karbonisano. He dies after Arichas Yamim in the 1806, and he's prolific, but he didn't print anything in his lifetime. Except for one, I think it came out at Mamish his last year of his life on Agaddah Shel Pesach, or a year after he died, with a grad that doesn't come out with his name on it, but we know it's his. That's a different story. But we have a ton of manuscript of his. As recent, even a few years ago, on Sotheby's, a manuscript of his that was never printed went on auction for a crazy sum of money. I'm not sure if it was purchased. I hope it was, and I hope the person will print it. But anyway, some of his material has been printed in recent years. One such work is a chibur of his on Masechtes Megillah. It's called Ginzei HaMelech. Very nice sefer. His stuff is in general excellent. He wrote on other areas also. We have drushes of his that he gave at Kol Nidre for many, many years, was printed a few years back, and very chashuva person. About him, just to mention two things, because he's not exactly spoken about so much. A few years ago, someone printed a bunch of letters between the Karbonisano and all his children. Different letters to different children. Some of his, a lot of these families, the Viri's brothers were very chashuv. Not only is this Rabbi Yedidia Weil, so I'm just going to mention very briefly two tidbits from these letters. These letters are very interesting because we don't always have so many letters that have personal information, not bad, but interesting information, and a lot of times some interesting bichlal material. One thing he says is, you were planning on making a siyum of Tainis B'chayrim before Pesach, so you don't have to fast. Ein nira li klal dinzeh. Interesting thing, which is obviously Tali in the Sugya, Richos Mamish, when the concept of fasting and having a siyum help, when does making a siyum help not having to fast? When this started, like everything else, Baruch Hashem, there's even a whole massive sefer on this written by a person from Bnei Brak who was recently nifter. One other interesting thing from this letter, and we'll conclude with him, is Nittel. So it's mamish in the time of we're getting very close. It's in Yana de Yom Shleishim Yom Kaidem Achag. We're supposed to discuss it. And in recent years, Nittel has been getting a lot of attention. So much so, I think it was last year, 2 years ago, a whole sefer came out of Hilchos Nittel. It's not the first sefer on Nittel. Don't worry, have no fear. It's already probably the third or fourth, maybe fifth even. Besides the articles about it, like everything else. But this is a new piece of information. Because a lot of people, especially Litvaks and the yeshiva, they always make fun. It's a Hasidish Azach, nothing to do with. There's no Makairs for it. In these letters, we see to write this. The Karbonisano is writing in a Agav in a letter to his son Rabbi Yedidia, about Nittel, and it's clear from this letter that it was a minig that they were noyig about. Now, what exactly were they noyig? Whatever, that's part you have to see in this letter and why, and he talks about it a little. But he's not pro what ended up happening, which is that people started playing cards, etc., etc. But anyway, just to mention from these letters were printed in the Kaivetz. Which volume 7. Okay, so that's pretty much the Acharonim that mamish go through the Masechta. Again, since people accuse me of not mentioning Svardim, I would like to throw out that even though he's available on other Masechtas, when Megillah he's very special. Why we'll discuss in a moment is the Ben Yada, also another important sefer, and the last sefer of Acharonim specifically because it's unique, and I have a personal negias to it. Is there's a lot of people that they lose their fame. Why do they lose their fame? Because they have special fathers. One such person is Rabbi Avram ben Hagra. He was a Goyin Olam, but we don't really hear much about him because he had the father. His father was the Gra. Anyway, he was a Talmud Muvak by his father. And in recent years, they printed the Haggais that were on his Gemara on Masechtes Megillah. A fellow, Kalman Reddish, printed this in a volume of his on Gra-related material, and also interesting, nice things that you might not come by so often. Okay, Adkan, the Acharonim, or some of the Acharonim, so people don't complain to me that I missed the Acharonim. I'm sure I missed many Acharonim. I'm not trying to get all the Acharonim. Anyway, this is the sum of the Acharonim enter.
Excellent. Common Reddish, someone I know well, who lives here in Lakewood, right? Eliezer?
Correct, yes.
And this Ginzei HaMelech is available on Hebrew books?
Not sure. I did not have time to check. It was printed in 1977, but I'm 99% sure it's on Eitzah Chachma.
How about the Rosh Yosef you mentioned before?
A regular Rosh Yosef is available on Hebrew books and on Eitzah Chachma. This fellow's Rosh Yosef I mentioned, that guys, I'm not sure. I should have checked to see if it's available in stores right now, but I'm not sure.
Okay, fine. So I think we're at like 25 minutes, so that gives us like 5 minutes. We can wrap up with Agaddah, a lot of Agaddah in the Maseches Megillah, and the Masechta focuses a lot on Megillas Esther. So what do you want to say on those topics? Okay, so
I might break the 5 minutes, but I'll keep it very close to the 5 minutes. Okay, very briefly. Megillah is devoted to, a lot of Masechtas Megillah is devoted to Purim and Yonah D'Yoma, but not only that, it deals with Megillas Esther. Megillas Esther has a ton of material, out there, starting with the Medrash Rabbah, which to that there's a very recent addition, very useful, from a Yosef Taburi, and he put it out with someone, fellow what's his name, Atzmon is his last name. Anyway, it's a very useful Medrash. But moving on to the Medrash there's many Rishonim. Rishonim is very easy. A lot of them you could get in Mechon. A Meister of Cook printed similar to, they have a Chumash Teres Chaim, so they have a Megillas Esther Teres Chaim with a nice likud of the Rishonim, not likud, they print the whole thing of the Rishonim a lot of the Rishonim that are out there on the Masechta. Moving on into the Acharonim. So there's an article interesting from a famous bibliographer, Rabbi Yosef Cohen, where he traces that in the Mamish, the Dor of Gerish Svarad, people that themselves were from the Gerish Svarad or people from right after, that 100-year period of time, a ton of material comes out of Megillas Esther. He lists a bunch of them. I didn't have a chance to check all of them, but the most famous one today is one of the most famous ones today is the Menos HaLevi, who is famous for L'Chadaidi. Now, interesting is, I was not aware of this, the dates of this until very recently. Is that
Shlomo Alphabet?
Yeah, or Shlomo Alphabet. Sorry, yes. So 1585 is when it's printed. It's an incredible work and very important because it brings down tons of material from Rishonim on the Masechta relating to the Agaddah section that was not available or is still not even available to us. And it's only reprinted, even though it's first printed in 1585, the first time it's reprinted is 1911. Anyway, at the same Tkufa, I'm going to return just to mention, also relating to Agaddah. So I was saying earlier, a lot of the Rishonim, they skipped Agaddah to Gemaras. In general, we find that Rishonim, we don't have so much from them on Agaddah to Gemaras. Interesting, on Masechtas Megillah, we have a sefer it's called Elef HaMagim, from a Reb Shmaryo Hakriti. This author, he's active, I think he's born in 1260. This is a Pirush just on the Agaddah section of the Gemara. It was printed a few years back from what's known as Mechol Mekitzin or Damim in 19 in 2003, again by the same Aaron that I mentioned who did Megillah. This is a whole work, a few hundred pages on Masechtas Megillah, but only on the Agaddah Gemara. Very interesting material. We don't have time to get into it, but the Menos Halevi that I just mentioned, the Menos Halevi has a lot of things. He knew about this Elef HaMagen that was completely forgotten until this fellow Aaron put it out. Okay, the same Tkufa is, we just have to mention, of course, everyone knows, is that Rosh Alkabetz gave it for Shleich Manis. Are you allowed to give it for Shleich Manis? It's its own discussion. Seforim that are written Peirushim Shleich Manis, its own topic, not for now. But the Ramah also wrote a Perush on Megillas Esther called Mechir Yayin, philosophical, but he also seemed to have given it because of Matana for Shleich Manis. Are you really Yaitza? Okay, and Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Golis in his small historical work called Megilah lists out a few other such svarim that were given Mishayach Manis and relating to Purim. Anyway, moving on, the same Tkufa, contemporary of these people, is Rabbi Eliezer Ashkenazi, one of the Gedolei Hadar of the Tkufa, the Ramah, Beis Yosef, contemporary of these people. So he's famous for Ma'aseh Hashem. He wrote a sefer called Yosef Lekach. In recent years, Yosef Lekach has become very famous because it's a beautiful edition, which seems the Gra used this a lot. And there's a famous edition where the author shows where the Gra is agreeing with him, where he's not. It's own Bazundra Shmuz, but in Vilna, they were very into this parish. We also now have Haggayis of the Chai Adam, his notes on this Chibur also. Again, this is still the same generation of the Ramah and others that we said were working on Megillas Esther. Later on, besides the Vilna Gaon, everyone also the Malbim is another famous parish on Megillas Esther, and then to mention one other is the Yaris Devash and his drushes, Rabbi Snaipshitz. Various drushes have tons of material on the Agaddah Gemara's Masechtas Megillah. Okay, I think just in order to skip the rest about the Megillas Esther, because I don't want to be messed up on time, so let's just deal with, is there any more Noisim? Yeah, it was.
Okay, so even though we're over the time limit, we must get the contemporary svarim in, or else Eliezer is going to get a lot of complaints. So let's go. What contemporary svarim are available on Megillah?
Okay, so I'm not, when I mean contemporary, first of all, Megillah, it obviously talks about Megillas Esther. So more contemporary, just to throw out there, one sefer called Ir Miftzar. It's available on Hebrew Books. Deals with the halachas Megillas Esther. Very interesting. A lot of shilas come up with it. Worth to check out. Ir Miftzar. Here's how it looks, but it's on Hebrew Books. Encyclopedia Talmudis has an excellent entry on Megillas Esther, and there are sugyas in Megillas. Many of the sugyas in Megillas Esther relate to how the Megillah is being written. Worthwhile to use and check up. Now, Masechtas Megillah, a shaila that's been coming up more and more in recent years, is when to lane what. Daf Yomi already started in Megillah, so we know that there's a whole dion depending on where you are, when you lane the Megillah. So this is a topic which is, like many other such topics in Eretz Yisrael, has become very heated. Booklets are written about it, svarim written in Keseder. Just to mention one is a fellow went through all the areas of what's called Mukaf Chayma Mimaisi Shua Benun. It's called Megillah B'Mukafais Chayma. It's a Rav Yehuda Zolden. He wrote it as a doctorate in the Bar Ilan Talmud department. He went through all of Eretz Yisrael. It deals with archaeological discoveries and maps and all different things, and it's constantly changing every year because as they build more in Eretz Yisrael, the issue becomes more and more. This already started from 150 years ago, 130 years ago. Rav Tukashinsky writes a lot about it and others. Okay. One last area, because it's negated to Masechtas Megillah, is a lot of Hilchas Kriyas HaTorah. Kriyas HaTorah, just to mention more classical works, is already starting from the 1760s. We have the Emes L'Yaakov from Agazi, which was recently reprinted by Stalin. We have the Chidah with David Emes. Then we have, moving further, is the Shari Ephraim from Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Golis, the Shari Ephraim, which was so important. For every Rav was considered to have to know this sefer. It comes up all types of Shaylas Nachas Kriyas HaTorah. And then, just to mention two last svarim related to Kriyas HaTorah, is an excellent sefer Shulchan HaKriya, available on Hebrew Books.
And quoted by the Mishnah Berurah, right?
I'm not sure how much in Mishnah Berurah quotes the Shari Ephraim. I'm not sure how much he does. In other areas, he quotes him much more. But it could be he quotes him, but not maybe as much as he quotes him as in Mata Ephraim, the Hainun Hilchos Yom Naram. And the last sefer is an extensive sefer from Reb Tzvi Hirsch Grodezensky, Rav in were all down the boondocks in America. The times when America was in a very bad situation, Yiddishkeit was terrible. This Yid was sitting around, his kehillah was whatever, and he put out many works, and he put out 3 massive chiburim on Hilchos Kriyas HaTorah, lamdische chiburim, full of information. Those are available on Hebrew books called Mikroi Kodesh. Anyway, Adkan Seforim for now, and maybe a different time we'll discuss some more.